Hello, and welcome to the newest episode of Borderline Podcast Disorder. Um, sorry, I've been sleeping all day today. That was pretty much what I've been doing. I'm in the day when I'm getting this ready to be out on Monday. If you're listening to this when it's coming out, which is Monday, then I'm probably not sleeping and just. Actually, I think I'm at work on my part time day job. Yeah, I think I'm at work, and I'm feeling. I mean, I'm feeling good. Like I think I'm just sleeping because I do feel quite tired. Although I woke up early and I tried to make some pancakes, which I did. I did make the pancakes, but they were the butter was quite soft. So I feel like it's become more like and also like I made it in the Romanian way, which is like the crepes actually, and I couldn't flip it because the butter was too soft, and you know what, it was fine because I made I like to call it a pancakes eaten pancakes mess, you know. That's what it was, and that's okay because it was still delicious. I think the ratio, like the taste of the pancakes was brilliant. Actually, again, in one hand, most don't know if it's heartbreaking or not, but they were probably the tastiest pancakes I've made, at least in a very long time. But yeah, they just didn't put enough flour, and then I I was just too. I forgot the word to grab some more flour and put on. And then at one point, I decided to actually do add up some more flour. Um, and I did. And there are a few ones that look good, and they still tasted very good. But anyway, that's enough pancakes talk or crepes talk, which also means shoes in England, right? Which is I find quite weird, you know. But yeah, besides of that, again, I've been sleeping around today. I thought I'd be more active. The day is not over. The day is not over, so I might go out for a run or even maybe go to the gym later tonight. Um, because this has been the week so far. Again, it's been still quite busy, working on the day job, going to the gym, and then I did a couple of gigs this week, just trying new stuff. Some stuff worked, some stuff didn't. In regards to the mental health side of things, it's not the it's not the easiest time. I feel quite stressed. I'm still in a in a anxious sort of state of mind quite naturally. I even found out. I realized last night that my partner doesn't really like when every time something bad happens. Um, I'm pretty much like, yeah, I saw that coming, and now I realize that that's not my um, that's not me predicting the future based on like factual evidence. It's pretty much just me being anxious and having played scenarios in my head so many times that one of those scenarios was actually the one that it's happening, you know? And yeah, I don't know. And then as I realized it, because at the beginning I thought, hey, why is she, why is she getting so, or like, why does she seem like she doesn't like me saying that, oh yeah, I've seen that coming. And then I was like, oh, I think that's why, because now I don't like it, you know? And yeah, it's I can't remember what was I thinking about last night. I think it because we got home actually quite late because we left the house in the morning and we got home together after about 13, 14 hours of being out. Um, so yeah. Anyway, Um, this week's episode is it's a great one. I mean, I think they're always good. I hope so anyway. But this is been such a brilliant conversation. I think I told Arno as so. The guest today is Arno Michaelis. I hope I pronounced his last name right. And I don't know what I expected from the episode. As you know, guys, I don't have my questions made up. I don't have again an agenda. We kind of start recording and see where it goes. But it was such an amazing conversation, and I had a great time recording with Arno. He's in America. I mean, you'll hear it from when we start talking. But yeah, it was quite nice, and I do enjoy, especially. I think, luckily for me, I say luckily, but he's in a time zone that wasn't that bad. I feel like it was midday for him when it was evening here, so it was very achievable. It was very achievable to be able to record the episode, and we did. And now it's out there for you to listen. Hopefully you enjoy it, and or again, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it, because I know I'm biased, but I think it was a great episode. But I just hope you enjoy it at least as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And yeah, I think from me that's it pretty much. If I think of anything else, I'll tell you on the outro. But yeah, enjoy the episode.
To Chicago.
Oh, okay. So right. Because I was gauging that based on the time zone, but I didn't know. Sorry, I think Milwaukee's in the same time zone.
It's okay. Every time I'm in Europe, that's like how I have to explain to people where Milwaukee is, because a lot of people don't know Milwaukee, but everyone knows Chicago.
I mean, I know Milwaukee because then I might. Are you a fan of the basketball team?
I'm a hockey guy, but I do like it when the Bucks are successful, because it kind of brings the whole city together. Everybody like vibes out on the Bucks, and I don't dislike basketball, but most of my sports watching time goes to hockey or American football.
Nice. Well, I wanted to ask you before we kind of like dive into the conversation. For anyone who doesn't know who you are, if you just want to give a very like brief introduction, and then I'm curious even like about your times in Europe, and how often whether you've been to London, how often, and stuff like that.
Sure. So my name is Arno Michaelis. I work as a peer exit specialist and comms executive at Parents for Peace. People can find Parents for Peace at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. At Parents for Peace, we coach families with a radicalized loved one in regards to how to create an environment that's most conducive to lead that loved one to a better place. We also work directly with the radicalized individuals themselves, and we train frontline responders like law enforcement, social workers, mental health professionals, and teachers about best practices in regards to dealing with extremism. Beyond my work at Parents for Peace, I would best be described as a storyteller. I've authored 2 books. My first one is called My Life After Hate, which is available on Amazon. The second one I co-authored with an amazing guy named Pardeep Singh Kalika, and that's called The Gift of Our Wounds, along with another awesome co-author named Robin Gabby Fisher. And I've been a professional speaker since 2010. I've done speaking engagements literally around the world, many in London, England. Actually, the last time I spoke in London was in May of 2022, when I spoke at the U.S. Embassy on a panel on anti-Semitism, and also did a speaking engagement for a great group called YPO. So I've been all over Western Europe. uh, many parts of the UK. I've been to Ireland, all over Scandinavia, and Germany, France, Belgium, Switzerland, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, Italy, and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
No way. How come? What were you doing in Bosnia?
I was in Bosnia in 2014. I helped to organize a conference on approaching counterviolent extremism from a gendered lens. And I did that in collaboration with the Joan Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice in San Diego. And the conference itself was held in Sarajevo, and we also traveled a bit around Bosnia and Herzegovina, really in memorial to the genocide that happened there. We went to Srebrenica, went to an identification center, and as you can imagine, it was a pretty heavy trip up till that point. But it ended up with great local organization that provided health services and actually focused on serving children who were the product of rape during the genocide. And we got to meet a lot of those kids and had an amazing feast, and everybody danced. And it was like everybody at that event was from either side of the genocide that had happened in the early 90s, and now they're all getting together and eating and dancing and singing together, and it was really an uplifting way to wrap up the trip. It was beautiful. I really love Sarajevo, and hope to return sometime and see more of that area.
Amazing. And I mean, I've not been to Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I grew up in Romania. So
Okay,
we were
awesome.
quite close, and it was again. I feel like it was an ongoing, or like actually it's quite weird because it was the conflict, or like again everything that happened was so close to us, but yet we were never as aware of it, or like there was not necessarily a
Mm.
big thing. But yeah, then growing up and actually meeting people from Bosnia or the former Yugoslavia, you I got, I guess, what's the word, curious, and I started doing some research. But yeah, it was quite strange, and again, I haven't thought about it in years. Actually, I didn't know. I did some research, or like I was trying to familiarize myself with your history a little bit, but
Thank you.
I have not found this about you going to Bosnia. So this is the first time I actually thought about Bosnia and Herzegovina in a very long time.
Well, I'm glad it came up, because it was a really amazing trip for me. And like I said, I'd like to see more of that part of the world. I'd definitely love to visit Romania sometime as well.
I mean, this is the thing. It would be quite interesting, and I would be quite, um, yeah, curious to see what would be your perspective of it. I don't know how up to date you are with the political situation in Romania. Which, if you're not, I don't blame you. Uh,
I'm not. I'm not. So yeah, if you want to fill me in.
Well, it's been a quite, again, like the most recent elections. They've been quite, I guess, divisive between a person who was, again, quite like an advocate of like sovereignty, and uh, to some extent had some more extreme views. Again, I also don't know enough to say for a fact that that's exactly what it was. But
Right.
then the other person was the other candidate was more like, oh, pro Europe, pro being united, and like sticking together with our neighbors and stuff like that. And again, it kind of basically, what I'm trying to say with this is that it resurfaced this idea of nationalism, and then it's like, how far do you take it? Like, how far, I think
Mm.
the question that I asked myself before I went to vote, ever since this started, it was more about, I love my country and I want the best for my country, but then, is it fair to again, like I still have to be realistic on, what can be done and how things can be done. And I don't think that just by saying that, oh, you're just going to take the power in your own, the matters in your own hands is the way to go. And yeah, anyway, that's why I feel like now thinking about the sort of work that you do, it would be quite interesting to see what would be your perspective, in this situation. But again, I I I had this weird theory, which I ended up posting on social media, was about how, I and actually I'm quite curious actually to see what's your thought about this. Where I found that in Romania, uh, it feels like people, although they say they might make a decision that seems more aggressive, or more damaging. It feels like they are doing it from a point of, oh, I love my country, I love my people, but I just had enough. And it's quite heartbreaking. It was quite a heartbreaking thing to see that. And again, the pro-European candidate only won by like a very small margin, and just made it. And yeah, my whole idea was like, it's sad because you almost you don't see, it's not like people who want to say take their country and bury into the ground. It's actually people who think that they are, they want what's best for it. But is that where do you draw a line? Where do you know that you're not going too far, or you're not doing more damage than good?
Well, it's interesting. When you bring that up, it reminds me of really the difference between patriotism and nationalism. A lot of people seem to think those words are synonymous, but to me, I define nationalism really according to George Orwell's essay, which is pretty famous. If you just Google George Orwell's nationalism essay, you'll find it. It's about 3,500 words or so. It's a bit of a read, but he makes the case that nationalism isn't necessarily restricted to geographical borders. So it's, you can be a nationalist for Germany or a nationalist for Hungary or whatever geographically defined state that you might be talking about, but you can also be a nationalist around an ethnicity or a religion or an ideology. My past, I was a white nationalist in which I saw my race as my nation. And that's very much in line with Orwell's essay, making the point that nationalism isn't confined to geographic borders. So thinking about the situation in Romania that you're describing, I think it sounds to me like that's where the difference lies. And to me, patriotism is like, I love my country. I'm a part of this country. It's part of my identity. But I also understand that I'm a neighbor in the world, and I'm not threatened by other countries. I don't see my love for my country as a reason to fear or as a reason to attack other people. Whereas with any sort of nationalism, it really fosters an us versus them dynamic. And I think a lot of what happens, especially in Eastern Europe nowadays, when they're considering whether to join the EU or remain a part of it, that all comes into play. And the nationalists are the ones who would say, like, we don't need the EU, we don't need them telling us what to do and dictating our economy and all that type of thing. And in some certain instances, I suppose there could be a case made for that. But for my experience in Europe, I really look at the EU the way I look at the USA, in that the United States is made up of 50 different states. And each one of these states is different. Each one has a different kind of cultural aspect. And going back to the founding of the United States, the founding fathers really had a vision of states' rights, and that each state would have some autonomy and some sovereignty. And so the EU may or may not resemble that, but I think the economic advantages of being part of the EU would outweigh the downside. But again, I'm not really as educated on it as I need to be to give an informed opinion.
Oh, of course not. Then I realized that again. This all just came to mind
Sure.
after we started recording. It's not something that I was thinking about before. I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. But now I guess I want. Well, actually, there is one more question I want to ask you because you mentioned before the introduction that you were a American football fan.
Oh yeah.
When I love American football.
Awesome.
And but again, I love it as someone who's been living in Europe and mostly in Romania. I don't know how I got into it. I think it was actually because of Rocky Balboa. It was my hero growing up, and then Philadelphia and supporting the Eagles.
Okay,
And
it's all connects.
but then,
Yeah.
who do you follow?
Well, I'm from Wisconsin, so it's genetic that I'm a Packer fan. I'm all about the Green Bay Packers. Have been for all of my life. It was interesting because prior to the pandemic, I watched the Packers every Sunday, and that was the extent of my time investment in American football. But when the pandemic hit and you had nothing to do and you're sitting home all the time, I started watching every football game I could possibly take in, and with a robust Dish Network TV setup, I could record games and literally like have enough games to watch one a night all week. And the more I watch, the more I start getting into it. And so nowadays, when football season's going on, I'll watch probably 2-3 games on Sunday, and they're always adding more weekday games too. So now there's always been Monday, and now there's reliably a Thursday one, and sometimes they'll play on Saturday, and I just take them all in, and I'm kind of at the point now where there's no bad football game. I have some teams I like more than others, and I always find someone to root for, and I really just have come to appreciate not just the athleticism of the sport, but really the strategy and how much of an impact that has, and how a good football organization is going to really have to have the complete synthesis of all that, like not just the talent and the dedication and the athleticism of the players, but when your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator can put the right personnel out at the right time to counter their opponent's personnel out there. It becomes like a chess game where the guys are actually going at it as they move it, and it's awesome. It's a lot of fun.
I that's how I actually. It's funny because that's how I think about it sometimes as well. Where now it's almost like this live chess game, but with like probably the fastest and the heaviest pieces that you can find
exactly
on the planet. And I think in the last couple of years, especially I grew up in the north of have you been anywhere out besides of London when you've come to the UK?
I've been to London many times, more times than I could count. I've also been to I believe it was Portsmouth, my last trip, which was south.
No way.
Yeah, and then I've also been to Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, and scenic Warrington, UK, which was where the organization that brought me was in Warrington, so it kind of all stemmed out from there.
Well, I grew up, or I lived most of my time in England near Warrington. Actually, I lived in Manchester.
Okay, right on. I love Manchester. It was a really cool city.
And when I first came to London, when I first moved to London, I started getting into football. I think I haven't skipped any Sunday games, and the oh my God, and I should know it now better. The 7 hours uninterrupted, the show with all the games are streamed at the same time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I ended up like watching that religiously. Like I would have Sundays off work and just go home and just watch that. And I was like I feel like that was probably one of the the best memories I have from living in London for the first year, as I was getting used to with life down here. But sorry, go on.
Well, I was in, I'm not sure if it was the last time I was in London or one of the previous times, but I was in London at one point when, and they do this every year and they're doing it more and more often, where they actually play a game in London.
Yeah.
And I was there once when that was happening, and I was really kind of blown away at just going around the entire city and seeing all these NFL jerseys like everywhere. Like people were really, really getting into it. It was pretty cool. It was definitely a new thing for me in Europe. But it's been cool because a lot of times I actually talk about the Green Bay Packers when I do my talks, because the main question I get is like, how did you get out of white nationalism? And the simple answer is exhaustion. And the exhaustion came from all sorts of areas. But one of the things that was exhausting was that all the things I took for granted growing up, all these pop culture things, not just sports, but TV, film, music, all of those things are forbidden to white nationalists. They're all seen as Jewish propaganda to oppress white people and to make us stupid and easier to oppress. So as a skinhead, I couldn't watch the Packers on Sunday. At least my guys couldn't know I was watching. I would like sneak away to watch the Packer game by myself, and I couldn't let my friends know I was watching, because if they caught me, it would make me complicit in the destruction of the white race. And I often cite my fandom for the Green Bay Packers as one of the reasons why I left white nationalism, which is very true. And it's amazing because I would be doing a talk in like Norway or Helsinki or in Spain even, and someone in the audience would be like, "All right, Packers!" Like there's Packers fans pretty much anywhere you go around the world, you can find a Packers fan.
I think, I want to cover some of the things that you just said, but first, I did notice this with Packers fans, and I think this because, as seeing it as like again a person living in Europe and again like just going on holidays around Europe and living in England, loads of people love Aaron Rodgers.
Oh yeah,
And I also think that because of the Lombardi, like it's still kind of, I think even people who don't know football, they know who Vince Lombardi is, and
right.
they probably have quoted Vince Lombardi at some point in their life. That's probably the first, because I know that when I started doing more research into American football, besides of just that, I like Philadelphia Eagles because I love Philadelphia.
Right.
Although I haven't been to Philadelphia at that point, by the way, I just loved it because of Rocky. But
That's awesome.
But then when I did some research into it, you find out that the greatest coach in the history, or even the man who's the trophy was named after,
right,
he made history there. So kind of I see it, and I actually, you said that, it's quite funny because I also notice now that every time I travel somewhere, although I feel like we live in a times where people love to wear, and I do the same. I collect football jerseys, like soccer and football and basketball, and actually every jersey that I get my hands on.
Awesome.
I see every time, or like most places, I do see a Green Bay Packers or the famous cheese hat. Sometimes you see that on if you go to, like, especially if you go to an American pub in the UK.
Yeah.
I think every American pub in UK has that, whether they are from Wisconsin or not.
They got a cheesehead there. That's awesome. Yeah, we definitely got. I mean, every team, every fan base has their little quirks, and every fan base loves their team. But there's few that are quite as legendary as the Green Bay Packers, and not just the team and Coach Lombardi, but the actual arena where they play at Lambeau Field. Like Lambeau Field itself is legendary, to the point where NFL players are excited to come here and play, even though it's not a friendly place for them, especially later on in winter.
Well, now I was because I've seen. What did I see? I think recently, because I watched I think I watched the Brett Favre and I the new documentary on Netflix. pretty good. And I've seen there some scenes, and yeah, like wait, what's it called Lambeau Field?
Lambeau Field is where it's called.
Yeah,
I've
it
been there many
looks.
times, but I've it was all when I was drinking, and I was like I have so my memories of Lambeau are very hazy. Because when I went, I was always like really rip roaring drunk, and by the time the game was over, I don't know how I even made it back to Milwaukee. But yeah, I need to go sober sometime for sure.
Well, how well now you see? I'm curious to find out how did you get, or was it at the same time that you basically like stopped being in this like the white nationalist organization, that you stopped drinking, or was it after you stopped drinking, or kind of like what was the pretty much like the timeline?
I actually stopped drinking a decade after I left the movement. So it
Right.
was, and it's always an interesting conversation because, especially at Parents for Peace, where I work now, we treat hate as an addiction the same way you would treat alcohol addiction or addiction to crack cocaine or opiates or heroin or whatever. And I think that's really valid. In my personal lived experience as an alcoholic, I know firsthand what addiction is like. I drank profusely for 20 years of my life from the time I was 14 until I was 34. And I was also addicted to hate for 7 years. And the parallels are one after another. And maybe the most poignant one is, again, when people ask me how I left hate groups or why I left hate groups, the answer is the same reason why an alcoholic quits drinking. If you go to any AA meeting or an NA meeting, everyone in those meetings is there because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Because addiction is literally you're sick and tired every day of your life. You're either like you're experiencing the withdrawal from whatever substance you're addicted to. That's sick and tired, literally, or you're chasing that substance and trying to attain it and frantically doing so, and that's exhausting. Or when you're using the substance, even though you're under the influence and you have this high going and it seems pleasant, at least in the first few years of your addiction, toward the end of your addiction, and I can say this from my experience, toward the end of my 20 years of drinking, when I was drinking, it wasn't like, woo, I'm at a party with a bunch of people getting drunk, having fun. It was me sitting in my garage by myself, drinking a case of beer and chain smoking cigarettes and listening to music and drunk dialing whatever poor bastard I could reach on the phone. And it was miserable. So I was sick and tired of that, and that's why I quit drinking. And you can absolutely apply that same dynamic to being addicted to hate. When you're a white nationalist, you literally have to cultivate fear every day of everyone who doesn't look like you. You have to remind yourself how much of a threat they are, not just to you, but to your people. Like every single day you're doing that in the same way that a crack junkie is stealing car stereos to try to trade for crack. And it's an exhausting process. It's exhausting to cut yourself off from pop culture things that I mentioned that you once took for granted and are now forbidden. And it's most exhausting to limit the amount of people you can connect with. I think one of the real prime needs of a human being is to connect with other humans in a genuine, authentic way. And it doesn't just happen with any human. Like some of us get along with each other, some of us don't. Some people vibe together, other people's don't. And the more you limit the pool of human beings you can connect with, the harder it is to find a genuine friend, to find a genuine connection with another human being. And so I'll never forget when I left the movement and I'm like, oh my God, I can be friends with whoever I want to be. They don't have to look like me. They don't have to think like me. And that's really what it came down to. It was not only when you're in the movement, you can only be friends with white people, of course, but not just any white people. they have to be white people who agree with you, which is a tiny fraction of the people who are racialized as white in human society. So you basically are creating this engine of loneliness that you get trapped in, and it literally continues to suck the life out of you, along with this process of not only not being connected to other people but hating them and enacting violence upon them, and or just not having an ounce of compassion for someone who doesn't look like you and think like you. So it's a miserable way to live, and I was absolutely sick of it after 7 years, and that's why I left hate groups in '94. And yeah, it was 10 years later that I quit drinking. I was definitely self-medicating in that 10-year span to try to suppress the harm that I had done to innocent people and the harm I had done to the world and to my family and to myself. And being a man of extremes, I went from being a white power skinhead to being a raver. And I spent another 7 years in the rave scene, which I absolutely loved, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I wouldn't be honest if I didn't admit that the rave scene, while it dramatically opened up my social circle, and I'm hanging out with all these people I would have attacked a couple of years earlier, and that was really like a rush. That felt amazing. But of course, the rave scene being what it was, there was all sorts of drug use going on. So I added to my rampant alcohol use MDMA and all sorts of hallucinogens, and I was using narcotics as well. And so a lot of my time in the rave scene, I was pretty spun out. But looking back again, like I said, I wouldn't change it for anything. And I would make a case that certain substances like MDMA and like psychedelics can actually really be helpful in a healing journey to kind of shock your brain into seeing things in a different way. And in my case, that was definitely happening.
Interesting. And I love everything. I feel like so drawn into what you're saying and the way you're saying it.
Thanks.
It's amazing because it really, yeah, it really makes me think about a lot of stuff. But I'm trying to take it one by one and ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
Which again, it's quite difficult because I just want to listen to you for just constantly, just for forever. I was curious at first when you're talking about, and this is actually something that I'm wondering about. Where you talked how you were in the white nationalist group, and then you're like, look, I'm done with this, and then you're again in a raving scene, which is, like you said, is pretty much, I don't know by how much further away you can
right
get, but then how did you look, although again I actually feel like, because I think from my experience with struggling with alcohol in the past, I think that I might know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway.
Sure.
How did you, I guess, look after yourself in those moments when you were like, you know what, I didn't do good for a while, and how do you perhaps, how did you manage to, again, I guess, yeah, just be kind, or were you kind with yourself, in those times when you're like, hey, look, I didn't do the right thing, but I feel like I know I'm changing now, I'm learning, and I'm done with this part of my life. And also, especially because given the work that you're doing now, how do you almost like, again, do you see yourself sometimes in the people that you speak with, or the family, or when families talk to you about these people, and you're like, hey, look, like, it's not easy, because I think and even now I hate, or like I hate naturally, yeah, I don't like it when I'm wrong by
right.
any, like, with any, I think that's just a human nature.
Absolutely.
But then obviously when it's one thing to say be wrong about, I don't know. I was trying to find something that is not necessarily that meaningful, but then when
Which
you say
football team's the best?
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you see, when that's one thing, but then to know that your values change so drastically, yeah. How did you manage to, again? How did you manage to look after yourself at that time? Or if you didn't manage that well, how did it start, and how is it going?
Well, I think the discussion of how it started and how it's going is more relevant. And again, the rave scene was really instrumental in that. There's an anecdote I have of my early days at rave parties that comes to mind, and it's very apropos here, and it really kind of set the tone for me going forward. But I was at a party in Chicago, somewhere on the south side, some filthy, dilapidated warehouse, and I'm sitting on the floor at 4 a.m. on Sunday, like in between shaking my ass to house music, and I on my forearm here I have a like a Japanese kind of kanji demon, and underneath this there was a pile of skulls and swastikas and a bust of an SS soldier, and it said white power, like right kind of in the pit of my elbow. And before I had that covered up, I'm at this rave party, and some girl has my arm like in her lap, and she's like stroking my forearm and this tattoo and looking at it kind of puzzled. And she's like, "What's that about?" And I said, "Well, I used to be a Nazi skinhead and I feel really bad about it." And then she's like, "Well, you're not anymore, are you?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Okay." And then, then we went out and danced. And that simple interaction basically gave me permission to be present and to be where I was in that moment and not be mired in guilt and remorse and regret of all the horrible things that I had done. Now, it was certainly escapist in that context. Like, yeah, if you've done a bunch of horrible things in your life and then you go to a rave party and you're surrounded by beautiful women and you take a whole bunch of drugs and you just like freak out the techno music all night, like, yeah, you'll forget about the bad things you did for that evening at least, but it doesn't, it's not a lasting change, but it was a proof of concept for me. Like, it demonstrated it was possible to be present and be engaged with the moment where the past is not going to dictate how everything happens, or the past doesn't have to dictate how everything is happening in the moment. And that possibility that was introduced during my days in the rave scene, in which there was person after person who routinely forgave me and embraced me and accepted me despite who I had been just a couple years earlier. And that was really formulative. I don't think I could have taken the next steps without that. I did. I kind of stopped going to parties in around 2001, 2002, and it really was just because there was a lot of like law enforcement crackdown on parties that was really driving into clubs. And your old kind of outlaw party in the warehouse wasn't happening anymore anywhere, and which sucked. It was kind of an end of an era for us, and I like clubs just fine, and it was all the better for me as there was bars there and there was booze, but it was kind of the end of my raver days. And in 2004, when I quit drinking, by that point I had really stopped using any other sort of drugs, be it MDMA or psychedelics or anything like that. And after I quit drinking, I was completely clean and sober for a good 3-4 years. And ironic, it felt great, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, my past kind of came screaming up to back to front and center when I was no longer self-medicating to forget it. And then, as often happens in a human life, there's some sort of catalyst that kind of initiates another milestone where change happens. And in my case, that was in 2006. I fell madly in love with this woman, and it was the first time I had ever had a relationship sober. And it was all the more special for that reason. And I was really crazy about her. And I think in a way she was with me, but then she ends up dumping me for the guy who had worked at the Range Rover dealership because he had his shit together and he had a McMansion and a Range Rover to give her and all the material things she wanted. And I was utterly devastated. And I really I fell into this suicidal depression that lasted almost a year. But very shortly into that depression, I realized that it wasn't about this girl in particular. It was about my past. And it dawned on me that until I reconcile my past and I look at it with openness and honesty and I speak freely about it and I try to parlay it into something that can help people, I'm not going to be able to get on with my life and be happy or successful or ride off into the sunset with a beautiful woman who loves me. Like none of those things were possible until I use the analogy of a wound with a scab on it. And this actually goes back to something that happened to me in my pre-skinhead days. When I was a 14-year-old punk rocker, I was at a punk rock party in a little town kind of close to where I live in Milwaukee. And it was all punk rockers there. We had a punk rock band in the basement going, and their parents were out of town or whatever. And a bunch of preppy girls came to the party, and somebody did something to piss them off, and they all went stomping out, and they were leaving, and on their way out, they said, our boyfriends are football players, and we're going to go get them, and they're going to kick your ass. And I was like, oh, yeah? I said, why don't you just bring me your boyfriend then? And I tried to jump in their car, but they got in and shut the door. So I jumped on the back of the car, and they went whipping out of the driveway, and my buddy who also jumped on the back fell off when they went out around the driveway, but I'm still holding on. So they went flying down the block and whipping around the corner again, probably going about 25, 30 miles an hour, which doesn't seem fast like when you're driving a car, but when you hit the gravel going 25, 35 miles an hour, as I did, flying off the back of the car, it tore all the flesh off the side of one side of my face and all the flesh off both my hands. Fortunately, I had my punk rock leather jacket on, which did its duty and took a lot of the road rash that would have hit me otherwise. But as it was, I got up and I go kind of hobbling back to the party, and I'm like, give me the whiskey and we're going to go kick these football players' asses. And I'm trying to round up people to go and find these football players and fight them. And everybody's like, you need to go to the hospital, man. I'm like, no, I'm fine. And that was kind of the last thing I remembered until I woke up the next day in the back of my buddy's Subaru in the middle of a cornfield somewhere. And it was March in Wisconsin, so it was cold, like 50 degrees. And I remember waking up and looking at my hands and seeing all this, they're like hamburger. And I'm like, oh, what the hell happened? And I got a ripping hangover, of course. And I go home and I come walking in the door. My parents are like, oh my God, what happened to you? And I go, I fell off a skateboard. And they're like, well, you don't skateboard. And I'm like, yeah, not anymore. I don't. And so they took me to the emergency room. And this is about 18 hours after the actual wound happened. So, this is on a gravel road. So my hands are all scabbed up already, full of dirt, and just like there's nothing to do but scrub the scabs off with a Brillo pad. And that's exactly what some old battle axe nurse did. And as she's doing that, I'm screaming bloody murder, and I'm asking him to put me out. And she's like, "Oh, stop being such a baby!" And I'm just like, "Ah!" And it was one of the most ridiculous levels of physical pain I've ever experienced in my life. But I mention it because it was a very apt analogy for what I had to do when I started writing, which was I had all these old wounds that were festering and scabbed up, but had never been properly cleaned. And if you don't properly clean a wound, you can die of infection. Like the infection can kill you. So I literally had to rip off all of these psychological, emotional scabs and spiritual scabs that had developed over the 14 years or so since I left the movement at that point. And it hurt to do that. It hurt as bad as any physical pain I had. But I found that once I had ripped these scabs off, and then I kind of looked at my past with compassion and with kindness and trying to find some self-forgiveness, that was like literally the disinfectant and the medicine I needed in those wounds so they could start healing in a healthy way. And that's when I started writing about my past. It was 2007. And in 2010 is when I started an organization called Life After Hate, which at the time was an online magazine about compassion. And I had other former violent extremists who contributed to it and survivors of violent extremist attacks. And all together, we kind of talking about our trauma, talking about our wounds, and doing so from a place of compassion. It became like an engine of healing that brought me to a point where today I would never say I'm healed. I would never say like everything's perfect, but I'm so much better than I was 2 years ago, better than I was 10 years ago. Like I think with every day that progresses, I progress farther on my healing journey, and self-forgiveness is a big part of that, because before 2009, I had really resigned myself to the idea that I didn't deserve to be happy. I didn't deserve love. I didn't deserve success because of all these horrible things I had done. And I felt that this was some sort of justice to the people that I hurt. Like I felt like if I made myself suffer horribly for the rest of my life, that I would somehow be honoring the people that I had hurt back when I was a white nationalist. And when I started my meditation practice in 2009, I realized that my grudge against myself was made of the same raw material as the thought of a double cheeseburger with the works, that it was intruding on my attempt to focus on my breath. And if I can work with one, I can work with the other, because they're both made of the same raw material. So at that point, I realized self-forgiveness was not only possible, but necessary to pursue if I really wanted to make a difference and if I really wanted to help people. Because if I'm hating myself and not giving myself the grace I need to go out and be at my best, what business do I have to be on a stage talking to a bunch of high school kids about compassion or forgiveness or kindness or anything else? Like, in order to be authentic in what I was saying, I had to walk the walk in the sense of going through a process of my own self-forgiveness. And so ever since then, that process has been ongoing. I think I'm better now than I've been in the past. Years ago, when something, and in this business too, everybody's like, I'm going to get you on Oprah. We're going to make a movie. We're going to do this, this, and that. And you get all these promises of all these amazing things that are going to happen. And many of them are very genuine, and some of them are just total bullshit. But a lot of times they don't work out. And in the past, when they didn't work out, there was that little voice in me that would say, hey, you don't deserve it for those things to work out. You don't deserve to be successful because all the horrible things you did. And years ago, I would let that voice like take me over, and I would fall into a depression and I would get suicidal. Nowadays, that voice is still there. And when things don't work out, as they still constantly don't, a lot of things do work out, don't get me wrong, but when things don't work out, that little voice wants to poke out again and say, see, and now when that happens, I'm just like, all right, dude, yeah, I hear you. I get it. Okay, I'm going to put you away now because I got work to do. And as you mentioned, like when I'm actually working with an individual who's trying to get out of one of these groups, and an individual who needs to begin their own process of self-forgiveness, which I want to make a point, doesn't mean that everything I did is okay. It doesn't mean that all is well with all the harm I've done. by any stretch. But it does mean that if I really want to help diminish that harm in the here and now by helping another person, I have to go through that process myself in order to help them. And to that end, there have been people I've worked with who have told me after they've left a hate group to say, like, dude, you not only saved my life, but I think you saved a lot of other lives too, because they were on the verge of going out and committing some kind of mass casualty event. And so seeing actual results like that, it really drives home the tactical necessity of self-forgiveness. And it's not just some kind of kumbaya thing. It's that if I want to accomplish an objective, I need to be tactical about it, the same way a soldier in combat is. And in order to be tactical, I got to use the assets I have, one of which is self-forgiveness, others of which are compassion and gratitude and kindness, things like that.
How do you, in again, with the work that you're doing now, and I think even seeing the sort of the worst case scenarios of like what hatred can do, how do you keep yourself from, I guess, like feeling from being hopeless, because I can imagine that, in these situations when, and again, I'm sure you've seen it through time as well. If let's say, we went through a wave when anti-Semitism is on the rise, and then we have another wave where a different kind of hatred is on the rise, and then it kind of like dimes down for a bit, and then you think, oh, like almost, and I think at least I fall into that trap where I'm like, you know what, I think we're good now, and then something else happens,
right?
And then you're like, oh, actually, we're not. We're not where I thought we would be. What if we never get to the point where we would be?
Right.
Where I would like us to be. How do you? Yeah, like how do you almost again, like, yeah? How do you allow yourself not to fall into that? I guess an anxiety of some sort. That like it will never be enough, or like what if something worse comes next?
Mindfulness is really key to avoiding that type of hopelessness, and on a daily basis, my mind wanders like everybody else, and I've been meditating for 16 years now, and even with 16 years of practice, I can get beat down by current events. I can get discouraged by horrible things that are happening in the world, or by a failure I have with a case. I'm just not reaching this kid. I'm not going anywhere. But when I just look at the little things around me every day that are honestly just like miracles, and just celebrate those wee tiny things, that not just gives me hope, but it indicates that this human experience we all experience is a primally good thing at its core. That everything else, the analogy is, I've done a lot of personal development and a lot of meditation retreats and all things like that. And there was one of them where they talk about existence itself is like a blank movie screen. And there's like serenity and there's peace in that screen, and possibilities. You could project anything onto it. Everything else happening in the world is simply that. It's a projection. So you might be watching a horror movie, you might be watching a comedy, you might be watching a Packer game, but underneath it all is this primal serenity and oneness that's always there to connect with, as long as we can remind ourselves that what's being projected on the screen isn't the core reality. It's what's beneath it. And for me, honestly, my daily example of that lately is he walked out now, but I think you saw him earlier. My daughter has a habit of adopting pets and then dumping them on me. And she did that like 15 years ago with a cat. And I just at first I was kind of pissed because I'm like, I don't want empty cat boxes, and I travel a lot. And I'm like, okay, I'll take the cat. And 15 years later, I love this cat like nothing else on earth. And he just passed away last August 2nd, and I was really devastated. But at about the same time, my daughter had a little dog that she had adopted and she loved very much, and he was a rescue, and he's a real little character. And then she went back to school full time, and she was working a lot, and she's like, oh, can you come, the dog's name's Basil, can you come get Basil, can you come get him here, can you come get him here? And then after a while she's like, well, do you want to just take him and then I'll visit him and I'll watch him when you're traveling? And I'm like, yeah, why not? And I love the little guy, but he's just like this, he's got such a personality. And there's been so many times when I'd just be sitting with this little creature on my lap, petting him, and just experience this deep, deep gratitude that I have the privilege and honor of this connection with this crazy little animal. And I, especially since October 7th, I'm thinking of all this devastation and the horrific things that Hamas has done, and I'm thinking like I'm sitting in this peaceful house in a peaceful neighborhood in a peaceful little town in a peaceful state in a relatively peaceful country, and I have a roof over my head, and I have food to eat, and I have water, and I have a membership at a health club where I can go swimming and sit in the sauna and go in a whirlpool, and I have this little dog. Like I got this crazy little dog, Basil Tortellini, and how lucky am I? And I do feel a sadness that not everyone has all these blessings that I have, but I always make a point of never forgetting how blessed I am, and that's really how I maintain not just hope, but a faith in humanity and a belief that things can get better than they are, and I draw on that deeply on a daily basis because the world is a pretty messed up place right now. But in reality, there's a lot of things about the world that are way better than they've ever been, and we very easily lose sight of that as a human race, and I try to make a point of not.
You know, when you were talking about how sometimes when say a case you work on a case and the results are not what you what not going as well as you'd like it to be. Um, Actually, my point was, how do you what's it like to see the family of the people who are um, again a part of like an extremist group, or who are on that side, just because I'm curious, and whether what was your situation, or like what was it like for your family as well, when you know I guess my closest example is when I first told my mother that I was struggling with depression, long before I came out with like my diagnosis and everything like this. um she couldn't stop but blaming herself.
Mm.
So I guess now, because I'm conscious of time, but yeah, okay, I'll phrase it in a much better way, the question: what would be your message to the people who are, again, the family of the people who are involved with extremism, and how do you perhaps like how do you feel if someone says, oh, I feel like, this is my fault, or like or like, I've driven the person in that I've driven the child, the person, whoever it is, in that direction, or to do that. And then now, again, we talked about how you look after yourself, but then how do you help someone who's to perhaps not beat themselves up because they feel like they are the reason why someone is escalated?
Well, again, it's mindfulness, and even if someone's not going to adopt a meditation practice, which is what I recommend, and it doesn't mean you have to like become a full-fledged Buddhist, but if you just take 10 minutes a day and sit in quiet and peace, and you focus on your breath, and you practice being present, you dismiss your thoughts and return your focus to your breath. You do it gently. You do it with kindness and forgiveness for yourself. You're practicing those things and you're normalizing those things in the rest of your life, the rest of your day. And what that leads you to is, my initial answer to that question is to say, look, every day is a new opportunity to start again. You don't have to have each moment dictated by the past. Every single human being on this planet has the agency to make that decision. It's much easier said than done. It doesn't happen instantly, and it takes practice. The same way Aaron Rodgers spent an entire lifetime training to be able to throw a football like he does. A human being needs to train their mind to work, to be present. And if you can dedicate yourself to that training, you do kind of create a new normal where you are present every day and you're not letting the past dictate what's happening in the present moment. But all that is to say, for people who are guilty, they're guilty about what they feel guilty about mistakes they made. And you're right, parents do this all the time. And my parents did not, they were both horrified by my ideology. Neither of them espoused those kind of ideas. And while there may have been mistakes they made when I was young that kind of led me to my antisocial behavior, it's still all on me that I made the decisions that led me to points A, B, and C. And again, the most important thing is to say, well, today's a new day. We're starting over today. We have a lot of families where we have like kind of an absentee father and a doting, coddling, overcompensating mother. And you see this dynamic over and over again. And we tell that father and mother, like, hey, yeah, we got to realize what we're not doing as well as we could and start doing better, but also dedicate ourselves to saying, okay, I've not been around. I've made all these mistakes. Today I'm going to be around. Today I'm going to be present for my kid. And I'm going to dedicate myself to that today. And then tomorrow you make the same dedication. The day after that, you make the same dedication. For the mom who's trying to overcompensate, she's going to say, okay, today I am going to dedicate myself to not be a helicopter parent and to not be trying to solve all my kids' problems and to not try to be making up for dad not being around all the time. I'm just going to be present for my kid, let him know I love him, be the best mom I could be. And tomorrow I'll go through that same kind of dedication. So it's not easy, but it's entirely possible. And I've seen it done over and over and over again, besides just the proof of concept I've experienced in my own life. So the sports analogies keep coming up. As I mentioned, I'm a big hockey guy. And right now the Stanley Cup playoffs are going on. It's a rematch between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. And it's been some just unbelievable hockey. But what it always comes down to, the same as it does in the Super Bowl, but the Stanley Cup is much more difficult because it's like 7 Super Bowl games in a row potentially. But every time it comes down to who wants it more. And as cliche as that sounds, that is what it comes down to. I can see one team is going to do whatever it takes every single shift, every single puck battle, every single shot block. These guys are like putting their faces in front of pucks going 90 miles an hour to try to stop a goal being scored. Like if an athlete can have that kind of dedication, a parent certainly can. Yes, parents aren't paid multi-million-dollar salaries, but what's more important than the future of your child and the ongoing relationship you have with your child every day? I think the actual payoff of a parent putting in that dedication is, in the long run, much, much greater than even the most holy of all professional trophies, the Stanley Cup.
That's very fair. That was a very fair and well put point. And I love sports, so I love any sports analogy. Um, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't ask you more about hockey. I like it, and I'm actually quite again I'm a fan of, but I'm not I'm not that knowledgeable. Like I still watch it and I wonder what's happening. I don't know if you ever get that with any. I think it happens with baseball as well. But like I watch it and I'm like I'm not sure I know what's happening, but I'm gonna
It's
watch
an
it anyway.
acquired taste. It's this year. There's a big deal. We had they had a Four Nations face off instead of a boring All Star game, and that tournament, a mini tournament, was so amazing that it opened up hockey to a whole new fan base. And now, like all those people who were introduced by the Four Nations are now like super dialed into the Stanley Cup this year. And I think it's amazing for hockey. And you're right. It's not an easy sport to take up even as a fan because you got to be familiar with the rules. It's hard to keep track of the puck because it's such a fast game. But once you get into it, it's really pretty astounding, and it's far and away my favorite sport. Football's a second. I would say it's I don't know, maybe not a close second, but it's right up there. I watch a ton of football too, but in any case, I think sports are a wonderful thing. It's one of the. You asked me what keeps me going, and I watch this amazing hockey game happening, and not only am I amazed by the players, but I'm amazed by the coaches, and I'm amazed by the fans, and when you think of the whole ecosystem that a sports team kind of serves as a foundation for all the sports bar owners whose entire business depends on putting this game on a TV so people can come there and watch at the pub if they can't make it to the game itself, and all the people who make jerseys and buy jerseys and all those things. It's really pretty astounding and again to think of us as human beings who 200,000 years ago were like, okay, we got to not get killed by saber-toothed tigers and somehow find enough to eat and keep ourselves from freezing to death. Like we went from there to here, and it's a pretty amazing journey. And to just sit back and think of how cool it is to be a part of it, that's something that keeps you going as well.
I I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, and I feel like sometimes, or like I do sometimes use this analogy of, we're living, we're probably living the best and the worst times the humanity has seen, but all at the same time, because I even thought about like even the to get to do this, like we haven't met in real life, like this would have not been possible even,
Exactly.
for again, like for any reason, a few years ago, like even if we were born, say, even like a couple of decades earlier, we would have not
Right.
been able to do this. This is the result of of how the world is going, and the fact that, although again, now unfortunately now it feels like sometimes bad things can feel worse because it's the podium or the stage that it's showcased on is much bigger.
True.
So is the good stuff. Like I think even again with hockey, with American football, again, I think when I actually sometimes I do feel quite bad that, and I feel quite sad for my family to not be able to have actually get to enjoy all the sports and all the, like, imagine the stuff that I can see on TV now. Like even before we picked up this call, I was watching one sitcom and then I can go and watch another one,
Right.
and I don't have to wait until tomorrow for a new episode to come out, or
Right.
for a rerun to happen. Stuff
Exactly.
like this where, like, yeah, in the moments where I'm, you know what, it's, yeah, maybe things are not great, but also they are not that terrible, because in hindsight, it's good, and yeah, it's quite. I'm quite privileged to even have those, like, little, which actually feel to us like little things,
Yeah.
but in the grand scheme of things, if you want to be more holistic,
Right.
I think they are huge.
Well, it is amazing, and that's the point. If I'm sitting here on my computer in my house talking to a Romanian guy who lives in England, and we're having an awesome conversation, and we've never met before, but like we're having a good time. talking about that human connection I mentioned earlier that we all need and that is so important to us. A lot of times when I do talks or if I'm doing an interview, people put me on the spot and they're like, say something inspiring. And I have a few things that come to mind when I get put on the spot like that. But the one that comes to mind now, just leading out of our conversation here, is that I really believe as human beings, we find what we look for in life. Like if you want to find reasons to be angry, reasons to hate people, reasons to be afraid, reasons to be greedy, reasons to be jealous, you will find all of that, all you can possibly handle, especially nowadays when we all have a screen in our hand that will deliver whatever we wish to us instantly. So if we find what we look for, we need to be very mindful of what we seek, because we can not just as easily, because it does take a little more dedication, a little more faith. But if we look for reasons to love other human beings, if we look for reasons to love our life, to be grateful and to be kind and compassionate and forgiving, we're going to find reasons for that as well. And again, the wonderful news is that every single one of us has the agency to do that. And I'm just delighted that over the years I've realized that about myself, and I'm always happy for the opportunity to share what I've learned with other people.
Well, Arno, thank you so much for doing this. Now, the last question is, where do people find your work? Or like, what are you most active if people want to stay in touch? And also, if you want to, please tell us again the name of your two books, I think, that are published.
Yeah, so my first book
And
is called My Life After Hate. You can find that on Amazon globally. I also have a blog at mylifeafterhate.com. And there's a link to order the book there, as well as a bunch of other writing I've done outside of the book. Gift of Our Wounds is my second book that was co-authored with Pardeep Singh Kalika and Robin Gabby Fisher. I believe that's available on Amazon as well. We have a website at giftofourwounds.com that will take you to where you can get the book. And then Parents for Peace is the organization I work with to help families with radicalized loved ones. You can find that at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. And what's most important to me is to get that out there just so everyone knows that there is a resource they can reach out to if they're worried about a loved one. Hate and violence are entirely preventable, and we all need to be cognizant of that and to work to prevent it at every opportunity. Beyond that, I am on LinkedIn as Arno Michaelis, and same handle on Instagram, just at Arno Michaelis. And I'm fairly active on both of those. I check them both every day or so. And I'm like anybody else. We get on social media and you get down the rabbit hole. Next thing is 2 hours later. So not to say that never happens to me, because it happens all too often, but I do try to limit it. I try to make a point of living life off of my screen, and I see time spent with my dog as much more valuable than time spent on Instagram or LinkedIn. But I'm happy to connect with anyone there if they'd like to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Arno. I appreciate you. And this has been such a wonderful hour. I honestly, I don't know what I expected, but this felt amazing. And I'm really, really grateful.
Likewise, brother. It was awesome. Thanks for reaching out.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Cool.
Okay. So what do you think? Was it good? Was it what you hoped for? Was it better? I realized as I was putting the sound, the tracks together, something happened at the beginning, and I lost a bit of the conversation. Don't worry, it was just us greeting each other, and I was so scared for a minute or two, because I thought I don't want this to I don't want anything to go wrong with this, basically, because I'd be devastated if it doesn't come out. It happened before, not with the. I don't think with the Riverside stuff. I think that's been pretty constant. But I did have a couple of times. Or was it once on Riverside? No, no. I had two interviews that we did in person that had to be, or like we had to redo it. Three actually. Oh God, that we had to redo, and I don't think there was anything that made me more upset. You know, in regards to the podcast, of course, in life I've been through much worse, but still, you know, I just feel like I'm so grateful to the people who give their time to be a guest, to be a part of this. That yeah, I just felt really bad, and anyway, that just came to mind as I was recording now. As I was recording, sorry, as I was trying to fix up um, and touch up the conversation with me and Arno. But yeah, look, I had such an amazing time recording with him. Such a lovely person. I mean, I gauged that from his, you know, from watching him on social media, and to actually, you know, get to speak with him directly. We swapped obviously like a couple of messages, a couple of emails to get to put this together, but to actually have him spend the time and like, yeah, just spend the hour with me, it was wonderful, and I appreciate it so much. And yeah, folks, make sure you check out his work. I've had a look at his books, and the one that he wrote. It's for anyone. Although I think loads of people, by the way, who listen to the podcast are from the US. But if you're not from the US, if you're from the UK, his books are available in Europe as well. At least in UK, because I added it to my wish list this week, and I hope you do it as well. And with that being said, one thing that I've realized I forgot to mention at the beginning, as I was as I put the mic down, is that the tickets I told you about the big things that are hopefully going to happen from September onwards. Well, the first one, the first gig that I've managed to put together with another comedian as a split bill is at Angel Bill Murray Comedy Club in London. The show will be on Friday evening, very evening, as in 11 p.m. start. With the Tev Everett, and the link to buy tickets is in my bio on social media, and on their basically on the Angels website. But yeah, just go through my bio and you'll see a link there, and in the link tree. And yeah, I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. And from me, Pickle and Sarma, until next week, stay skillful. Bye.